So as we continue through the book of Judges, we talked about this downward spiral that's taking place, and it kind of culminates at the end of the book. And there's a couple stories at the end that are pretty rough. And there's a refrain that happens over and over again, which is that in those days Israel had no king. Everyone did as he saw fit. And the first story is the story of Micah that's in chapter 17 and 18. And what's the gist of the story of Micah?
So Micah, I think, steals from his mother, and then he ends up returning it, but then using his mom's build an idol and an ephod or something like this, and and eventually he takes on a Levite who now is going to act as priest for him. So this is a weird thing. You got idolatry, but still wants a Levite to act as a priest. It's this weird amalgam.
Right.
But then eventually this Levite leaves him, steals his idol and his ephod, and goes off with the tribe of Dan. Because why be a priest for just one man when he can be a priest for an entire tribe?
Yeah. So we have the story, and apparently there's a big bunch of killing that happens at the end of this story as well, and kind of a town that gets wiped out and destroyed. And so you have this story that's full of pretty much everything that's wrong with Israel. You have a guy who's incredibly morally questionable to start with, builds himself this idol, builds an ephod, which is the thing that a priest would have to determine the will of God. So wants to worship an idol, but at the same time wants to be able to determine what God's will is. You have this incredible syncretism. And before we as modern Christians say, well, just, people back then were like that. I mean, we do the same thing. I mean, you have right now, we're living in a time of incredible syncretism where the cultural view of spirituality and Christianity have been so mixed together that most mainstream Christians would be shocked to understand, I think, how much of their beliefs actually come from the culture and not from their Christianity. And you have this general view of what it means to be spiritual, where we kind of define we create our own moral compass, and being true to ourselves is really what it means to be a good person. And you'll find any number of Christians who will agree to that to a large extent. And so you have a guy who's like that, and then he as you said, he creates this situation where he has his own Levite, and then all of this gets stolen from him basically, and there's a big slaughter that takes place with this. And then in verse or chapters 19 through 21, you have another story, and what happens in those chapters. There's another Levite that is part of this as a concubine, and
he's going back to kind of retrieve his concubine who's left him, and they find themselves on the way back, and somewhere in the tribe of Benjamin, I can't remember the city, and essentially his concubine is raped and killed. And he divides her body up and sends it out to the tribes, and they're going to come fight against this city, and then the entire tribe of Benjamin stands up for the city, and then you get this civil war going on where all the other tribes fight against Benjamin, and most of the tribe of Benjamin is actually slaughtered.
Yeah. And then you have a weird thing at the end where the few Benjaminites that are left, we need brides for them, but we can't give them brides, so let's just let them steal some brides, and the whole thing is just so messed up and bizarre, and you think, well, what kind of person looks at this and says, well, it's like at every turn they make the worst possible decision to rectify the problems of the previous terrible decision that they made, and this refrain that happens over and over again, that in those days Israel had no king, everyone did it as he saw fit. What's the purpose of that refrain? And what do we see happening here, and what are we moving toward in the history of Israel?
Obviously, we are moving toward a king as leadership in some way, shape, or form, but it also it's offered essentially as an explanation for why things are so bad in the book of Judges. Just so we realize this is not the way it was supposed to be, but everybody was just doing as they saw fit.
Right. And so what we're going to go for then is that we're going to have a king, and then everything's going to be fine, right?
Yeah.
So what's the problem with this refrain of in those days Israel had no king and everyone did it as he saw fit?
Well, it's interesting because obviously, they get a king, but God makes it very clear that was not my design. I'm supposed to be your king.
Right.
So, when it says they have no king, it means also that God is not actually their king either, like it was supposed to be.
Right.
Because, there wasn't supposed to be a Saul or a David or anything. God was supposed to be their king.
Right.
But obviously, we talked about the importance of leadership in our Joshua study, and we're going to see it, all throughout the kings and stuff, that as goes the king, so goes the land.
Right, right. And what's really happening, and it's very interesting here, is that God is revealing himself to the people. They're supposed to see who God is, see his glory, worship him in joy, submit their lives to the commandments that he's given to joyfully. That the result of that is going to be something like Eden in their land, that the nations around would see this and then also turn to God, and that would spread throughout the whole world. Now, what we're going to see is that the problem is number one, the people don't do that. They're not joyfully obeying. They're not joyfully worshiping. And they think that what they really need is a king. And that the king is going to be the person that actually imposes order from the outside. That rather than a love of God that's going to be the thing that orders their nation, it's going to be fear of the king that's going to order their nation, that this is salvation. Now, this might seem kind of naive to us, but do we do the same thing now?
Absolutely. So we think that whoever we elect as the next president is going
Right.
to change everything.
Right. If only we get our guy elected, everything is going to be better. It's going to be a new utopia. It's going to be a new promised land. And really, it's foolish, because as Christians, what we should understand is that without the love of God in the hearts of the people, that there is no hope. And that's really what we should be working towards. We should be working on loving God and displaying that. It's like each one of us is kind of a little micro Israel, right? If I, as a Christian, I'm a priest to the world, just like Israel was supposed to be. And my household, it should be something that displays the order, the love, the beauty, the glory of God, and that people around me see that and want that. That's the way that it's designed to happen. It's not, I'm going to go out there and make sure that my guy wins the election. I'm going to make sure that, what I'm saying, that the laws that get passed are the ones, if only we had the right laws, if only we had this, if only we had that. That should never be our hope as Christians. That's not where salvation is found. And the Bible's pretty clear on this, that even after a king, it's utter failure. And in the midst of Israel being taken into captivity, the promise is that God will turn their heart of stone into a heart of flesh, that his spirit will come on the people, and that's ultimately the answer to the problem. And I think that it's important to remember that. Now, how is it that if we take that idea to heart, what are the implications of that in the way that we live, in the way that we deal with people around us, in the way that we parent, or the way that we interact with our wives, the way that I might interact as a boss to my employees? How does it change our life?
I think significantly. I think we can spend a lot of energy towards certain political aims, thinking that that's the path to salvation, not realizing that it's not necessarily a bad thing, but thinking that it's the path to salvation and stuff like this is mistaken, especially if you're doing it at the expense of not investing in the relationships around you, because the truth is that's where transformation has the best chance of taking place in your life.